Good morning, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. This morning we have a little bit of a different program than usual. Usually we do Mensch at Work. Today we are doing Demystify Purim, which is part of our Demystify series, which we try to do before each holiday or each period to try and make sure that we're in line and we know what's coming up and what's going on. The Talmud actually tells us that Shloshim Yom Kodem HaChag, that 30 days before the holiday, whatever holiday it is, we should prepare for the holiday. We get ready, make sure we know the story, even though it's a story we've heard every year. Make sure that we know the laws, even though we do the same laws every year. And there will be those who will text me, as they do every single year. Rabbi, remind me, what do I need to do with this? When do I do that? And how do I do this? Etc., etc. And obviously we'll be more than happy to accommodate, but you guys are the smart ones that you're here to make sure that you know what to do in advance and you're not texting me at the last second, etc. So we should be in for about an hour journey. Daiber. If you're in this room, it needs to be quiet, okay? Thank you. So we are actually going to start around Purim. We're not going to start with Purim itself. And if you have a handout, for those that are here in person, if you have a handout, it's here on the table in front of you. And you can follow along with me in that handout, although I will be a little all over the place, I will warn you. But my goal is to cover everything that's on the handout. So like, for example, we're not going to start at the beginning of the handout. We're going to start in section 2, which is called Around Purim. Okay? So Around Purim is the month of Purim. So about 2 weeks ago, we started a new month. It's called Adar. And Adar, of course, is a very special month on the Jewish calendar. Not only because it's the last month of the Jewish calendar, believe it or not. I know we celebrate Rosh Hashanah in September. In other words, Rosh Hashanah is halfway through our year to one degree or another. But there are two ways. There are two Rosh Hashanahs, if you will. Two ways of counting the calendar. And Adar is the last month on the Jewish calendar as per the biblical calendar. In other words, Nisan is the beginning, starting with Passover, etc. Starting with Rosh Chodesh Nisan and then Passover, etc. And Adar is the last month on the Jewish calendar. It is also the most joyous month on the Jewish calendar. Whether we feel it or not, whether we realize it or not, this morning definitely there are parts that make it difficult for us to feel it. It is the most joyous holiday. And sometimes it is the most joyous month. And so sometimes we need to work on ourselves to make it, to feel like it's the most joyous month. And the Talmud tells us in Tanit, in Tractate Tanit, Mishenichnas Adar, that when the month of Adar comes in, we add in joy. Which is why we get all these random little customs for the month of Adar. If a person has a court case, the Talmud tells us, and this is enshrined in Halacha, by the way, this is codified in Halacha. If a person, yeah, exactly, yeah, Vicky has her story last year, yeah. If a person has a court case that they're very worried about, they're very stressed out about, they should try to have it pushed off the month of Adar. Right? You know, if you can have sometimes with court cases, you have a little leeway. Oh, it doesn't work for me. This month doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, Your Honor. It needs to be pushed off to the next month. Why? For spiritual reasons. Yeah. So if you have a court case with a non-Jew, you should push it off to the month of Adar. If you have a wedding, on the flip side, right, that you are planning, and you have the ability to make it in Adar, you should make it in Adar. Why? Because this month is supposed to be a joyous month. We're supposed to work on ourselves to add in joy. And the truth is that joy itself is an avodah. Joy itself is a service. It's like something we need to work on within ourselves to have joy. But much more on this. For those that are studying the daily section of Tanya, you know that we're talking all about joy, and how joy is not supposed to be dependent on things going well for us in life. It's not supposed to be like, well, I made a lot of money today, therefore I'm joyous. No, that's a superficial type of joy, a superficial type of happiness. But true joy comes from being in tune with who we are, and as Jews, and the fact that we have in the Shema, and the fact that we're able to serve Hashem, and that in that way, we are joyous just in being ourselves. That's the type of joy we're supposed to be getting in tune with Adar. When I was in yeshiva, we used to have what we called Adar dancing. May seem strange to those that are not Hasidic, may seem strange to those that didn't spend time in yeshiva. We would spend an hour, obviously after all the important things we needed to get done were done, you know, the studies we needed to study, and the davening we needed to daven, etc. There was designated time to be able to just go and dance. You ask yourself, hold on, I thought dancing is supposed to be a symptom. Sure. Isn't dancing supposed to be a symptom, right? Oh, if you're very happy, then you dance, right? If you're feeling in a good mood, then you dance. If you're not in the mood of dancing, can I tell you how often I ask people to dance, whether it's at a Purim party, at a Chanukah party, or even just on Friday night by Lechadodi, and they tell me, Rabbi, I'm not in the mood of dancing. I'm not up to it. I'm not into it. I'm not feeling it. And obviously, it's not the time for me to be getting into spiritual conversations. And can you please put this back on the buffet? It's not the time at that time for me to be getting into philosophical conversations. And the truth is that it's the opposite. Sometimes you need to start dancing, and then that makes you feel the joy, and you get into it. The Chinuch would often tell us, the Sefer HaChinuch, which means after our actions, our hearts are drawn. So sometimes we need to do the act, and then we feel the feeling. put on the costume, get into dancing, start singing, and then the joy follows. Anyways, just a thought about the month. We are also in a period that is known as the 4 Parshiot, which means during this month, from the beginning of the month of Adar pretty much until Passover, there are 4 extra Parshas that we add in, which means we have our weekly Torah portion, but you will see 4 opportunities, 2 of them passed already and 2 of them are still coming up, in which we take out an extra Torah scroll on that Shabbat. We take it out, we read an extra parasha along together with it. One of them was 2 weeks ago, when we read about what's called Pashat Shkalim. Pashat Shkalim means the parasha about the half shekel. So we know that the Jewish people were counted in the desert, they had to bring a half shekel, but you might not know that also this practice continued. Throughout the time of the Beit HaMikdash and the tabernacle, etc., there was a period once a year, and it started on Rosh Chodesh Adar. They would start announcing about the Shkalim, and everybody would have to give a half shekel, every single Jew had to give a half shekel, and this was used for any communal things that were done in the temple, right? And just like the original half shekel, it was done in a way where ha'ashir lo yarbe v'adar lo yamit, which means everybody gave a half shekel. Nobody gave more, nobody gave less. You wanted to give other donations to the temple, you were allowed to, but as part of this donation, everybody would give exactly half a shekel. And that money would then be used, think of it like a tiny, tiny little fraction of that was used to purchase each sacrifice for every morning sacrifice. Every morning in the temple, they would start off with a morning sacrifice, and that was bought from these half shekels. The Ketoret, the evening daily sacrifice, all of these things, any communal offerings, the Musaf, right? If there was a Musaf that was brought, Musaf was not each person bringing their own Musaf. A Musaf on Shabbat was brought from all the Jewish people. Where was it? Where was the money for that taken from? It was taken from a drop of that tiny half shekel, a tiny little fraction of it from every Jew together makes that, which made it a communal offering. So that was the first one of the 4 extra parshas. We read about this in the Torah, and in this way we're commemorating what they used to do in temple times. Continuing on, this past Shabbat yesterday, many people pointed out how relevant it was given what happened in Iran yesterday. Yesterday we read about the mitzvah that we have to remember what the nation of Amalek did to us, and to make sure not to forget it, and to destroy the nation of Amalek. That's an obligation that we have. We read about it in the Torah yesterday. Who was Amalek? Now's not time to get into the whole thing. One thing I will say, Amalek was a nation that attacked the Jewish people right after they left Egypt, etc. For those that are familiar, they literally became the arch enemy of the Jewish people. Now it's not time to get into the whole explanation for Amalek, but one detail is very relevant, which is Haman, from the Purim story. Boo! You guys are not on your game. Bina is on her game. Just want to say. All right. It's not early morning. And you're right, for her it's already mid-afternoon. Because she's been up for quite a while. So, he was a direct descendant from Agag, who we read about, by the way, in the Haftorah yesterday, for those that are following the Haftorah. Well, Agagi means from Agag. So because I said from, I don't need to say Agagi. But he was an Agagi, he was an Agagite. In other words, he came from Agag, who was the one person, if you were following yesterday's Haftarah, he was the one person from the nation of Amalek when King Saul was commanded to wipe out the nation of Amalek, and he did so. He waged war against Amalek and eradicated every single last Amalekite. He left Agag, unfortunately, alive for a brief period of time. During that time, he cohabited, and he had a child, and from that child, it actually came Haman. Thank you. Okay. I can always rely on her. There you go. So this is why, even though we try to just have one time a year, we make sure biblically we hear and we remember this mitzvah. But for us, we traditionally do that the Shabbat before Purim. Okay? We'll talk about the other 2 parshas and things come after, and Shushan Purim, other things come after Purim. We'll talk about that after Purim. Now, together with all of this, we have some other things that go around Purim. We have Machatzit HaShekel. So we were just talking about the Machatzit HaShekel. So even though today, unfortunately, we don't have a temple, maybe speedily rebuilt it speedily in our days, but we do have the mitzvah Machatzit HaShekel. We have a remnant of it that we keep it alive on Tainet Esther. So tomorrow evening is the custom by Mincha. You will see that if you come to shul tomorrow evening, there will be foil pans, because that's the custom of Chalad of Pasadena. I don't know why we can't get a proper whatever. I don't know if we have this. What we have foil pans, 9 by 13 pans. That's what we use. And there will be 3 silver half dollars, and you put in, really the minimum is $1.50, because 3 half dollars. Okay, but you try to give a little more. Ideally, you should give the equivalent of 3 half dollars, which is quite a bit more. We could Google exactly how much it is this year, and then you put that money into the pan. You take those 3 half shekels, which belong to the community, right? They're being given to you, that you can buy them and then redonate them. So you take $20, you put it in the pan. By doing that, you are buying these 3 half shekels. You take those 3 half shekels, you pick them up. Now they're yours, yes? Now you put them in, you donate them, that's you doing the half shekel. And the custom is, by the way, to do this for every single member of your family. So I'm going to do it tomorrow for Bina, and for Gitti and for Menachem and for Leah. And you do this as many times as you need to for each member of the family. Can you please stop this? I think it's clean enough, and I think the people on Facebook are going to be complaining soon that there's too much background noise from that. Okay, so we won't do it anymore. Okay, enjoy your allergies. Also, I think that Hebrew school might be starting now. If you want to go to the back, okay, take your water with you. You go to the back of Hebrew school. Okay,
my daughter makes my half shekel donation for me in Israel.
There you go. Okay, so she does it on your behalf.
But normally it's like $10. The equivalent.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah, it's definitely much more than the dollar.
The price of silver went up so much this year.
So could be.
It's $18.
Oh, she told you from 10 to 18. Wow.
Yeah, I mean from 10.
So there you go. So there you go.
Saying that
yeah, you have to give the equivalent.
His mom
that's why I was saying we have to check.
Weird charge, you know?
Okay, once we're talking about Tanit Esther, let's talk about what this day is. Yes, so Tanit Esther, of course, is the happiest fast of all the fasts. It's therefore also the most lenient, by the way. In other words, like I think it even says in Shulchan Aruch, if somebody's preparing the Purim meal, like the food for after Purim, they don't need a fast that day. Like, and they need to taste the food to make sure that it's proper. They don't need. If I recall correctly, don't quote me on that. I was like, ooh, okay, it's okay. It's a simon bracha. Don't quote me on that, but if I remember, it's definitely a very, very lenient fast for sure. Pregnant women and nursing women and anybody like that, anybody who has a hard time fasting, Tanit Esther is quickly pushed off. Why? Because the main reason we fast is to commemorate the fast of Esther, which we'll talk about in just a moment. The fact that the most important tactic, the most important strategy that we had during the war and everything that happened with Purim was the fast of Esther. So we're commemorating that fast. And we are remembering that Hashem always listens to our prayers. Yes, that Hashem. This is a clear instance where they fasted and prayed, and Hashem listened to their prayers. So we remember that. So if we have things that we need to daven for, we can daven for them as well. All right. So that's Tanit Esther. Okay. Now let's get into the actual Purim. We're now ready for the actual Purim. So, the story of Purim, of course, can be found primarily in the Megillah Esther. Yes, in the scroll of Esther. And we're going to soon talk about the mitzvot that we're supposed to do on Purim. And when we talk about those mitzvot, we'll learn that you're supposed to hear the Megillah read once by night and once by day. We go through the entire Megillah Esther. Now we have a big question, because I'm sure most of you have followed along in the Megillah Esther in English, and you've read the whole story, and you're like, but hold on. Then the rabbi gets up and he starts giving a sermon, and he's talking about other details of the story that doesn't say in the scroll of Esther. Where is he getting these details from? So the answer, of course, as usual, is Medrash. And Medrash means basically any additional oral transmission that accompanies written transmission. Right? So let's say you're all familiar with, let's say, with the Torah is the written law. And then there's Medrash that accompanies the Torah, which may be the oral law that fills in some of the details of those stories. There's lots of other oral law as well. There's the Talmud, etc. Right? So where is the Medrash on Megillah found? Primarily it is found in Tractate Megillah in the Talmud. So the Talmud is a very interesting, long composition. And as you know, the Talmud weaves in and out between lots of different types of conversations. And two of the primary subject matters, two of the primary genres that the Talmud fits into are halacha, so it's constantly trying to figure out the halacha, and also medrash or agada, as it's called in the agadata, as it's called in the Talmud. And that, remember, and that that portion of the Talmud in Megillah, the medrash or the agada that there is there, fills in lots of the details of the Purim story. So lots of things that we may not know, like who was Esther, how was she related to Mordechai, what did she look like, all sorts of things like that, right? Why exactly did King Ahasuerus put Vashti to death for not coming? All of these details can be found in the Talmud, etc. So this is not a complete story of Purim class. And we're not even really going to go through the story of Purim. I think we're familiar with it generally, but maybe we'll do like a very brief recap. But I do encourage every one of you that if you have some time from now till Purim, maybe go on to podcasts or to Chabad.org, go on to whatever it is. You can find the complete story of Purim. You'll hear somebody who will tell the story of Purim, but fill in all the details that I brought down in Tractate Megillah. In Tractate Megillah, by the way, it discusses the laws of Megillah and the laws of Purim very briefly. It is very, very lengthy in its filling in of the details of the story of Purim, and it's a fascinating study to do. If you have time to do that, do that. Take the art school Talmud and go through that. Okay. Let's talk about the name Purim. So the name Purim, of course, the Talmud tells us is based on the fact, not Talmud, the Megillah itself tells us, it's called Purim al Shem HaPur, because of the Pur. What was the Pur? Larry, you're already ready for tomorrow, huh?
Yeah.
Purim in the Wild West. Tomorrow you bring a fancy one. Okay, sounds good to me. Sorry, I had to comment on it. I just realized we're doing Purim in the Wild West, and you're already ready. So it's called Purim al Shem HaPur because of the Pur. What was the Pur? The Pur, of course, were the lots, the raffles that Haman threw to figure out which month he's going to kill the Jews in. Yes? Now let me ask you a question. Does anybody think that this war should be called the Beit Shemesh War because 9 people died this morning in Beit Shemesh? I don't think so. Not a great idea, right? Should it be called the War of Ballistic Missiles? Because their goal is to wipe out ballistic missiles? No. We call wars like this, Rising Lion, Revenge of the Lion, Epic Fury, I don't know, whatever all the names they come up with. Right? And from a Jewish perspective, usually we call holiday Rosh Hashanah, it's the head of the year, it's a spiritual definition of the holiday. Pesach, we don't call it the holiday of slavery, right? We don't call it the holiday of Paro trying to figure out how to enslave the Jews. So why Purim do we call the holiday Purim al Shem HaPur? Because of the lots. Right? Interesting question. Anybody ever think about it? The answer is because the spiritual holiday of Purim is also found, the victory itself was also found in the Pur, in the lots, in the raffles that were made by Purim, by Haman. What does that mean? Oh, you're saying boo for Haman? Yeah. What does that mean? So, lots are a very interesting thing. Raffles are a very interesting thing. When we say that somebody's going to cast a lot, we mean that they're going to leave it up to God. Hold on a second, Rabbi. What do you mean? When you don't cast a lot, it's not up to God. When I go work and I make some money, then it's not up to God. It is also up to God, but then it's enclosed in the rules of nature. Yes? Please sit in your spot. Then it's enclosed in the rules of nature. In other words, it makes sense. I go to work, I work, then I make my money, I get my paycheck at the end of the day. Sure, I thank God for it, but I also thank my boss, right? I also thank by the good work that I put in. Okay, topic for another conversation, the whole balance between how much we're relying on God and how much we're doing the work ourselves, etc. What is a lottery? A lottery is the opposite, right? I've never heard somebody say they go to the gas station, they buy a lottery ticket, then they become, right, like the guy in Altadena, then they become the next billionaire, and then he says, thank God for my wisdom and my efforts that I put in and the way I purchased the lottery ticket and the numbers that I chose. It's ridiculous. The opposite. It becomes completely up to God. In other words, a lottery signifies when something is completely supernatural. Now, it's true that the story of Purim started off supernaturally bad. In other words, it makes no sense that Achashverosh listened to Haman and was going to wipe out all the Jewish people just because Haman said so, etc. And he didn't even bother looking into finding out why, who his wife is, Esther is, etc., and why she might be campaigning for the Jewish people. The whole thing doesn't make sense. It's true, supernaturally it started off negative, but after the Jewish people did Teshuvah, what happened? The story turned around supernaturally. And Purim, the name Purim represents this. It represents the supernatural hand of God, that even though we didn't see it, but the hand of God supernaturally was there. And if we pay attention, we can see the supernatural hand of God turning it over in a lottery fashion. So that's what we call the holiday Purim. Okay. Now, the story we know, of course, was called, the story we know happened during the time of the king whose name was Achashverosh. Achashverosh was apparently some Xerxes or another. Don't ask me, I'm not a historian. But what we do know is the Talmud tells us that Achashverosh, there are two opinions. One opinion was that he was literally just a madman. Or another opinion was that he was very easily manipulatable. I'm not sure if those two are completely separate explanations. Could be it's the same thing. Either way, and they say that's part of why he was called Achashverosh, because Ach Roshi, right? I get a headache. People get a headache from the way he governed the nation. Yeah. But he was a monarch. And he did rule over the entire Persian Empire, which apparently was most of the inhabited world at the time. And of course, we know that he had a queen whose name was Vashti. And Vashti, no matter what some very misguided Jews will tell you today that she was the heroine of the story because she stood up to her husband, Vashti was a wicked and evil and corrupt and immoral person. I mean, you look at some of the stories in the Medrash about the way that she abused her slaves and the way she abused women. She certainly was no champion of women's rights, as I've heard some people try to say. I don't know where this comes from. I think people are just looking to stick modern agendas into anything they see in the Torah. So they caught something, they just latched onto it. Heaven forbid to say that. Vashti was a complete, an utterly evil and terrible person when you start to look into the details. As part of that evilness, as part of that terribleness, she abused the Jewish slaves that she had, forcing them to work on Shabbat and whipping them and making them work naked and all sorts of horrible things. And she was married to Achashverosh. And Achashverosh, of course, threw a 180-day feast, which, as we know, was to commemorate what he viewed as the end of the 70-year prophecy that the Jewish prophets had made, that was going to be the end of the exile of the Jewish people, and it would lead to the rebuilding of the second temple. And indeed it did. The Purim story ends up being the beginning of that. But Achashverosh was off by a year, and he threw this 180-day feast. And at the feast, he brought out vessels from the holy temple, etc. And in a drunken stupor, when the kings were wherever the different ministers were arguing over who has which land under Achashverosh's empire has the most beautiful women, Achashverosh called for Queen Vashti to come, and when she refused to come, he had her put to death. He wakes up the next morning, kind of like when we wake up in the morning after we're drunk, and we're like, what on earth did I do last night? And but hopefully none of you have ever had your wives beheaded, or your husbands for that matter. But he wakes up the next morning and he starts a beauty contest. And of course we know that this eventually leads to Esther becoming the queen. And Esther does not understand it. Neither does Mordechai. Mordechai is the Rebbe of the Jewish people at the time. He's the Jewish leader of the spiritual leader of the Jewish people at the time. And none of them understand it. They don't understand. But they trust that Hashem must have a plan. For some reason this is what's supposed to happen. So Mordechai just makes sure that Esther is where she's supposed to be. She's the queen. And the story continues. We get a little random story, which I want to talk about. There's these two characters that we're introduced to. I think it's in the third chapter or the second chapter of the right after the story with Esther becoming the queen. We get this random story, which is Bigsan and Seresh. Bigsan and Seresh are two random ministers of. They were Tarshishites, whatever that means. They were from the region of Tarshish under the Persian Empire, and they spoke Tarshish. And they're standing out. I guess they were upset that Achashverosh, for whatever reason, one reason or another, and they're standing outside the king's gates, and they're talking in Tarshish, which they think nobody understands, and they're plotting to kill the king. And Mordechai, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, as we know, had to be very worldly people. For those of you that were in the most recent course that we did, Captivating Cases in a bit of response, we spoke about how rabbis need to be worldly. They need to know the world too. And that applies still today, by the way. A rabbi needs to know the news. Doesn't know every single detail of the news, but he needs to know if something's going to affect somebody negatively, right? A rabbi needs to know the way the world works in order to be able to guide their congregation. So certainly members of the Sanhedrin, they needed to know how the world worked. So Mordechai was fluent in 70 languages, including Tarshish. He overheard this whole thing. He tells Esther about it. Esther tells the king about it in the name of Mordechai. And these two fellows are caught in the act, and they're put to death. And it's written down in the Chronicles. Why is this so important? Because later on, let's keep going. Haman becomes second in command. As with all villains, he lets the power get to his head, and I guess this is where Disney movies got it from. And he wants everybody to serve him, and everybody to bow down to him. Mordechai refuses famously, and because of that, he decides that he wants to have Mordechai put to death, and Mordechai's whole nation put to death. And this is going to lead to Haman coming to the king and saying, I would like to have these people put to death. Now there is a line that Haman says to Mordechai that I want to emphasize. That Haman says to there's so many lines in the Megillah that we could really talk about, but this is a powerful one. Haman turns to Achashverosh and he says, there is a nation, mefuzar u'mefoida debein ha'amim. They are A, dispersed, and B, among the nations. And many commentaries point to the fact that this was part of the problem. This is why Haman was able to succeed. Why? Because the Jewish people were dispersed, physically, mentally, emotionally. They were not with each other. They were not unified as one. They were a dispersed people. They were not unified. Number one. And number two, they were bein ha'amim. They wanted to be like the other nations. Yes, I'm Jewish, but I'm American first. I'm an American like everybody else is an American. And if being an American means I'm not going to keep Shabbos, or being an American means I'm not going to have a beard, or being American means I'm not going to keep kosher, then I'm going to have to sacrifice that. That was an attitude that the Jewish people had adopted at the time, unfortunately, and this was part of what led to, the spiritually speaking, to the decree of Purim. It's also, when they did teshuvah for that, what led to, as we'll soon see, what led to the salvation and the miracle of Purim. Okay, during this period, Mordechai fights a spiritual fight. He gathers, the Medrash tells us, I think it was 22,000 Jewish children. And he leads a spiritual revolution. He has the Jewish people repenting and davening until the Alter Rebbe tells us that for a full year, the Jewish people stood with Mesiras Nefesh. They were willing to give up their lives for a full year. There was not a single Jew, even though they could have converted out of Judaism or renounced their Judaism, and then they wouldn't have been included in this decree. And yet every single Jew, no matter where they were, was willing to give up their lives for Judaism. So much so that on the words in the Megillah which says Kiyamu v'kiblu, in the last chapter when it says that the Jewish people fulfilled and they accepted, says the Talmud, Kiyamu mashekiblu kvar. They finally fulfilled what they had accepted. Where did they accept it? At Sinai. This is 1,000 years after Sinai. This is after the golden period of the Jewish people with the first temple of King Solomon. And yet they had never fully put what we call, you put your money where your mouth is, right? So this is put your life where your faith is. They had never accomplished that. They had never actually shown that they're willing to be there for their faith. And this was what led to the miracle of Purim, was that they had fulfilled, they brought out into reality this idea that we have a neshama, that no matter what, our neshama stands strong. And no matter what, we are willing to give our lives for Judaism. And no matter what, we're going to be in this with God, even if it means giving up our lives. Anyways, we all know the end of the story, but the turning point is Balayla Hahu. Balayla Hahu, which is the beginning of the 6th chapter in the Megillah, is the beginning of the story, because even though this is between the 2 feasts of Esther, right? What happens is, there's one night that Ahasuerus can't sleep, and therefore he has the Chronicles brought to him, and they read from the Chronicles, and and he reads the story of Mordechai, and this leads to Mordechai being led on the horse with the whole parade, and Haman being disgraced, and then that leads to the second feast, etc., etc. But I want to talk about the fact that our sages tell us that anytime it says the word melech, anytime it says the word king in the Megillah, this is a reference not just to the physical king Ahasuerus, it's also a reference to God. So when the 6th chapter starts off, and this is why when the reader in the Megillah reads it, he raises his voice. It's not just a reference to Ahasuerus having a hard time sleeping. Hashem, all of a sudden, the sleep of God, the King of Kings, the King of the entire world, was awakened. Now you look at me and you say, Rabbi, what does it mean God was asleep? Right? What it means is that asleep means when God acts in a natural way with the Jewish people. And as per nature, the Jewish people deserve to be annihilated, whatever, because they were involved in this Su'udah and this feast with Ahasuerus, and because they had done all sorts of things but that was all according to the natural order. When the Jewish people showed that they were willing to give their lives for God, so Hashem said, oh, you're acting supernaturally with me? Then Hashem reflected back and he acted supernaturally with them. And that's spiritually speaking, God awoke from a state of sleeping, which is where God lets the world act naturally, to a world of supernatural, which is the beginning of the whole miracle. And then, of course, we know how the story plays out with everything turning around. Right? From the Hafachu, it says the entire thing became from what could have been the darkest day for the Jewish people to the happiest and most joyous day for the Jewish people, as we know, the holiday of Purim. Okay. Now, let's finish off section. So we went through section 1, the story. Let's do section 2 around Purim. We did most of it. I just want to talk about Shushan Purim. So if you take a look in the Megillah itself, it says that in the city of Shushan, which was the capital city of the Persian Empire, the Jewish people were given one more day to fight off their oppressors. So that was the 15th day of Adar, which this year will be on Wednesday, not Tuesday. And therefore, the people of the city of Shushan kept Purim the next day. In other words, they had one more day to fight, which was the 14th day of Adar. Therefore, their day of rest was the next day, the 15th day of Adar. So therefore, Wednesday would be their commemoration of the Purim miracle. As a result, the Talmud tells us that any city, just like Shushan was surrounded with a wall, any city that is surrounded by a wall, when we say a wall, we mean an ancient wall that goes all the way back to the times of Joshua, any city like that celebrates the next day. To the best of my knowledge, the only city we're aware of today is Yerushalayim, maybe another city or two in Israel. That's like this. Okay. So how do we celebrate Purim?
Monday night, just clarify it. The fast of Esther is Monday.
We're about to do it right now.
Okay.
The practical. So that is the story of Purim. And that's some of the spiritual insights. We'll talk a little more about some more of that. Let's talk about the practical. How do we celebrate Purim? Vicky wants to know, how do we celebrate Purim? So Purim begins on Monday evening. Okay? Not on Tuesday. Tuesday is Purim. And you'll always look at your calendar, it'll say Tuesday. I even had somebody who kept making mistakes, kept saying, is Purim Tuesday, Wednesday? They're right. Tuesday is Purim. Wednesday is Shushan Purim. We don't really celebrate Shushan Purim. I mean, whatever. We were still extra joyous on that day, and we were in unity together with our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, especially at a time like this, etc. But Tuesday is the actual day of Purim, and it starts on Monday night. So today, when I tell people when Purim is, I tell them Monday night and Tuesday. That's the full Purim. It starts on Monday evening. It starts in the evening. Well, Monday is going to be Tanit Esther. We're going to fast the whole day. For those of you that want to fast, the fast starts at 5:02 a.m. and I believe it ends at 6:15 p.m. If you want to get up early for a morning cup of Joe, or your Wheaties, as Rabbi Anoka likes to say. So the night before, you have in mind that you're going to eat in the morning, and then you can eat earlier as long as you wake up before 5:02. For those early risers. The fast starts at 5:02. There's extra prayers because it's a fast day, etc. And then in the evening, as part of So we do all the prayers together. Mincha, the Torah reading by Mincha, Machzit HaShekel by Mincha, etc. And then Ma'ariv begins Purim. When we do the evening service, it begins Purim. When we begin Purim, the first mitzvah of the holiday is to hear the Megillah twice. So the first thing we do is read the Megillah. In fact, most people don't eat, even they don't break their fast, right? Until after, if you need to, obviously you can, right? The fast is over. But the custom is to wait till after the Megillah reading, and that's when you have your coffee or your whatever, or your first l'chaim or whatever you're going to break your fast on. I recommend a full cup of scotch. That's the best way to break your fast. If you haven't eaten for 12 hours, the best thing to do is to have a full cup of scotch. Especially on Purim. 6:15, the fast is over, yeah. If I remember correctly, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, double check the calendar, but yeah, I believe that's what you're going to see. And we'll send out an email later today also with all the times for this.
Yeah, what time does
service is here? So mincha here will be at 5:25 tomorrow.
5:20.
Yeah,
okay.
That's just our mincha is going to be at 5:25. Please join us, and then you'll stay for all of that. Okay. Well, now when we read the Megillah, both by night and by day, but we're holding by night now, so we'll do this. A few things to think about during the Megillah. First of all, it says that you're not supposed to miss even one word of the Megillah. So it's very important that it should be quiet, which is why you'll notice we always do a video presentation, silent video presentation, but a video presentation that plays together with the Megillah, like that the kids have something to watch, and we give them like some whatever noiseless candy, if that's possible, to keep them busy during the Megillah. It's important for the kids to be here. Obviously, it's a holiday. It's all we try to involve our children, but we have to make sure that they're quiet. Certainly, the adults will make sure to be quiet. And for the adults, we have Megillahs with English like that. You can listen in English, but if you do know Hebrew, you should try to follow along word by word like that. You're listening to every word because you're supposed to hear every single word of the Megillah. And obviously, we don't do it on a microphone because a microphone invalidates anything you need to hear in Judaism because a microphone does all sorts of distortions of the sound. So therefore, a microphone doesn't. Meaning, it's not just an issue for Shabbos. Shabbos is a different issue. But even during the week, if you're listening to something, it has to be heard directly with your ears. So they're not like Havdalah, for example. We don't make Havdalah on a microphone. You can do all the verses you could do, but the actual blessing of Havdalah you do outside the microphone. If you haven't noticed, we do Havdalah, we do it outside the microphone because otherwise you're not hearing the person. You're hearing a distorted version that comes through the audio digital system. It's a conversation for a different time, but that's why there's not going to be a microphone. But we'll have somebody reading loud, and it should be very quiet in the room, and it will be very quiet in the room, and then you hear the entire Megillah. The one time it should not be quiet is, of course, whenever we say Haman's name. Whenever we say Haman's name. Ooh, very good. There you go. Oh, finally. Bina would be proud. Where is she? We blot out Haman's name either with a gragger, or with cap guns, or by screaming at the top of your lungs, or by banging your feet, or whatever it is. The Chabad custom is that we don't do this by every single time Haman's name is mentioned, but rather only have Haman's name is mentioned with a title. Haman the Agagite, Haman the son of, whatever it is. Or Haman the evil one, so then we do it. But regular Hamans we don't. You can think blotting out his name. You don't have to actually bang it. There are 4 verses throughout the Megillah that the reader of the Megillah pauses. We say them out loud, and then he reads them inside. What is the significance of these verses? I'm not going to go through all 4 of them, but basically each one is a significant moment in the Geula, a significant moment in the redemption. So that's why we read these verses out loud. That is so far as the Megillah is concerned. The rest of the Mitzvot of Purim we do the next day. Okay, including reading the Megillah a second time. So next, we hear the Megillah a second time during the morning services. Here at Chabad, we'll have services at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday. If you'd like to hear the Megillah during that, I would say the Megillah reading will probably be somewhere around 7 o'clock, maybe 7:15, because there's Torah reading as well. So maybe around 7:15, but it's fairly quickly. But obviously, if you don't hear the Megillah, then we'll have plenty of Megillah readings throughout the day. And then we continue with the other 3 mitzvahs of Purim. I should mention that when we read Shechianu in the morning, Shechianu, the mitzvah, thanking God for bringing us to this day, on the morning of Purim, you're supposed to have in mind all of the other mitzvot of Purim. Like you're not going to make a Shechianu when you give Mishloach Manot, and when you give the charity, and when you have the feast. No, the one Shechianu in the morning goes for all of them. Okay? We make the blessings on the Megillah, we read the Megillah, after that we finish the davening. We do this by the way in Tefillin, for the men. It's very important. That's why the best is to come to Minyan in the morning and hear it in Tefillin. Mainly because in the verse, La Yehudim Hayta Ora V'Simcha V'Sasam Vikar, the word Vikar, the Talmud translates, that's talking about Tefillin. But oh yes. Purim is a rabbinic holiday. We just like Hanukkah, we wear Tefillin on Purim. And if you come to the Purim party, we'll be happy to help you put on Tefillin, which is a regular mitzvah in addition to the 4 special mitzvah. Okay, now once davening is over, we move on to the other 3 mitzvahs. What are the other 3 mitzvahs? The first one is Mishloach Manot. Mishloach Manot is plural. To send gifts of food. Right? Manot actually literally translates as meals. So it's very important. I know there's all sorts of fancy ideas out there to give deconstructed this and deconstructed that. It's very important to give food that is ready to eat. Okay, whatever you give has to be ready to eat. Because Manot literally means meals. Manot is also plural. So you have to give 2 types of food. It doesn't need to be 2 brachot, but it does need to be 2 types of food. And the Chabad custom is to give to a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael. But you don't have to do that. You just have to give to as many people as possible. Give Mishloach Manot. The next mitzvah is Matanot Le'Evyonim.
When do you do that exactly?
Ideally, as soon as possible. Why? Because we try to do mitzvah as soon as we can. So if you come to Shachrit in the morning, bring two Mishloach Manot to give them to people.
So we can bring it tomorrow night?
Yeah, during the day. During the day, not by night. But as soon as possible during the day. Yes.
So we can't bring it Monday night when we come.
If there's somebody you're not going to see and you want to give it to them, you can give it to them. I've given Mishloach Manot by night, but the mitzvah is done
during midnight, right? Because it's not nighttime yet.
Well, then it's not in Mishloach Manot yet. No, but by the way, listen, I don't want to discourage that. There's also the spirit of Mishloach Manot. Vicky is bringing up a very good point, which is, if you're going to be giving gifts all the time, make sure you're giving from Mishloach Manot. Make sure you're fulfilling the mitzvah properly. But that doesn't mean that every single person needs to be given that way. Give around Purim, that's fine. Give before Purim, give after Purim, to people that you don't see, especially if you like to give to all your friends and stuff. Go for it. But the mitzvah itself should be done by day, and if you ask me when, as soon as possible. We try to do mitzvah as soon as possible. That's why we have a Brit early in the morning, right? Why? Because we try to do all mitzvah as soon as possible. Yes?
So is it the donation to it that supports the giving of food count too?
Okay, so I want to talk about exactly what I think you're bringing up. You're talking about the Purim project that we have here at Chabad.
Yes. No, well, not just that.
Okay.
I mean, I did Mishloach Manot for PJTC as well.
Right, and through Chabad, and those are two Purim projects. I want to talk about that in just a second. Okay, let me first do the next mitzvah, then we'll talk about that. The next mitzvah is Matanot Evyonim, which means to give gifts to the poor. This is always a mitzvah, obviously, and you see that the word Evyonim is plural. Evyonim means poor people, so you're supposed to give to at least two poor people. There is also, it says in Shulchan Aruch, Kol HaPoshet Yad Nostim Lo, anybody who sticks out their hand on Purim, you're supposed to give them. So anybody who's needy, who sticks out their hand on Purim, who you get an email or you hear from somebody that they need to, right, you give them. Now, ideally, you should give it to somebody so that it should end up by a poor person on Purim, so that they should be able to use it on Purim. There are organizations, including Chabad, that will make sure that happens. In other words, you give a donation, and part of your donation will go to make sure that two poor people will get food that day, to feed people that day. There's an Israeli organization, for example, if you want, I think it's called charityforisrael.com, if I remember correctly, Rabbi Glukowski's charity. If you want, I'll send you the link. Or you can just give it to Chabad, and then we'll make sure that it ends up by poor people on the day of Purim. Including Chabad also partners with organizations in Israel to make sure that it gets to people on Purim. It's a very important part of it. Now I want to talk about what Annie was pointing out. There is a concept called Purim projects. Purim projects means, and Chabad has one, and I think almost everybody around the table here is getting one. Purim projects means you're going to get a box, a fancy box with a fancy gift, and together with that, all sorts of food inside of it. And it's Mishloach Manot. And what does that mean? It means that everybody from the community gave donations to the shul, and the shul is going to give Mishloach Manot based on who they chose. They're going to give it to those people for them. So let's say they choose $5 a name or whatever. What is it? It's $5 a name? $7 a name. So they're going to give it to as many people as they say to give it to. Now, this is true, and it does qualify for Mishloach Manot, but ideally, you also want to give it directly. Okay? That's why Chabad is going to make sure to give Mishloach Manot to at least two people for you on Purim itself. Okay? But you should also try to make sure to do the mitzvah mehoder, which means the proper way, to give two gifts, even if it's just grab an orange and a cookie and amitash at the party where we have them out for people to eat. Grab two, now they're yours, now give them to somebody, say this is a gift for you, and then do it backwards. Then you've done it mehoder, you've done it the right way. So in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say over this whole thing, and now, why do I say this after you bring up Matanot Le'Evyonim? Because that Purim project obviously also serves as a fundraiser for the shul. It doesn't cost as much money as the money that you're giving for the Mishloach Manot, right? The shul makes money off it, it supports the shul, plus everybody does Mishloach Manot. Now, that's why I think hopefully it's becoming clear that with regards to all of these mitzvot, there is the actual mitzvah, which you should fulfill properly, and there's also the spirit of the mitzvah. Giving Mishloach Manot, being part of these Purim projects, is being part of community, which was the purpose of the mitzvah. The purpose of the mitzvah was to add in community, and people should be happy with each other, be happy that they're getting gifts. Trust me, my children have been waiting for this day for a month, planning their costume and planning what they're going to give Mishloach Manot and what they're going to get from Mishloach Manot, etc., which is exactly what Mordechai and Esther wanted when they established the holiday. And then when everybody's giving gifts to each other, you increase the joy. So even if it doesn't happen on Purim, it's in the spirit of the mitzvah. But yes, it's important to make sure to do the actual mitzvah in the most mehuder way possible to actually give the gift on Purim. The last mitzvah is the hardest, to eat. Jews have a very hard time with this one. Eating. Seudat Purim, Mishteh Purim, to have a seudah, a meal. It should be a proper meal. It should be candlelit. You should wash for bread. You should have meat ideally, right? To have a proper meal for Purim. At this meal, we try to say as much l'chaim as we can. The Shulchan Aruch tells us, ad de lo yada, until you can no longer tell the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. Right? That's how much you should drink. Obviously, it would be extra for me to mention, but I'll mention it just in case. Now it's not mentioned that also you have to drink responsibly. So you do not need to drink excessively. There's all sorts of other ways that you can fulfill the mitzvah. Personally, I fulfill the mitzvah by doing so much community work on Purim that by the time Purim is over, I have no idea where my right foot and my left foot is. So I don't even need a drink in order to get there. You'll look at me and you'll see I'll be schwitzing. But we got tons of people to put on tefillin and tons of people to listen to the Megillah, so it's all worth it. There's other ways to fulfill the mitzvah. For example, some people talk about as long as you drink a little bit more than you usually drink, that's enough. So if you don't drink at all, have a little bit of the blue bartanura, and you're good. If you usually drink the blue bartanura, then drink some red wine. If you usually drink the red wine, drink a little bit of scotch or whatever it is. A little bit extra is good to get into the spirit of Purim. But yes, we definitely still need to drink responsibly. Another way of fulfilling the mitzvah, for example, is to drink and then go to sleep. And when you're sleeping, you definitely don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai, right? So that's like a cop-out. I don't like that one because I don't like sleeping on Purim. Purim is such a spiritual energy, as we're going to talk about soon. So I don't like that version, but it's a version. Yes?
What's the candles that we're referring to? We light candles?
No, not holiday candles like on a holiday. No, just that the dinner should have, whatever the meal should have, candles lit on the table. Let me see it here. I have it here. I wrote this in my notes, and I don't remember why I put it, but I'm sure I put it because it says it here in Shulchan Aruch.
That's what kind of confused me.
Right, hold on. I'm going to tell you. Yeah, no, you don't light candles with a blessing like we do for, here, Seudat Purim. Here, V'yesh lahadlik nerot, you should light candles derech simcha, to add to the joy. Because it's like a candlelit dinner. Think literally like a candlelit dinner. And I believe, even though I didn't write it in my notes here, but I believe it's supposed to be, you're supposed to have meat. Yeah. It seems like it's less certain to eat meat, but you should eat meat just in case. In other words, if you don't eat meat at the meal of Purim, you're okay. But it's less. In other words, it's less of a thing than by other holidays. But still, you should have. It seems like you should have meat. It's a conflict. That's why I didn't write it clearly. What was that? Exactly. Joy is with wine and with meat. Yeah. During all the davenings of Purim, Shachrit. Ma'ariv on Monday night, Shachrit on Tuesday morning, Mincha on Tuesday afternoon, and during all benchings of any meals that you have, might not necessarily only have one meal, you might have more than one meal, you should add in special prayers, which are Ba'al HaNisim. During the prayers of Shacharit, we don't do Hallel on Purim, we don't daven with Hallel. There's another prayer which is called Shoshanat Yaakov, which we say as we're rolling up to Megillah. It's just a nice poem about the story of Purim and how thankful we are, etc. There's all sorts of powerful lines in there. Okay. We have 10 minutes left. In the 10 minutes left in this class, I'd like to take some time to do section 5, which is the mystical element of Purim. Unfortunately, I don't even want to mention them in the same sentence, but unfortunately there is a movement, and unfortunately it also has some traction in Israel, that talks about Purim as like, Jews needed a Jewish version of Halloween. I don't even like putting them in the same sentence. But you see the parallel. They're like, you get candy and you give candy and you dress up. So it's just like we want to have fun. So let's get drunk, etc. And you see people wearing all sorts of, inappropriate costumes. And this is the way we celebrate Purim. And we get drunk and we throw candy at each other. So this means Purim is not supposed to be a drunken revelry. But I want to talk about where that comes from. Okay, it's not just because there's costumes, etc. There's a reason that of all the holidays that have been corrupted the most, Purim is the one that gets the most corruption out there. I've never heard of somebody celebrating Yom Kippur, but in a weird, corrupted way. Right? But Purim does have that. And I want to talk about why that is. That is because of a big Hasidic concept that I think most of you are familiar with, which is when something is very, very powerful, spiritually speaking, it also can be corrupted very, very deep. In other words, when it's very, very high, it can fall very, very low. Purim is, of all of the holidays, take this from me, quote me on this, Purim from all of the holidays has the highest spiritual power. And you're like, Rabbi, but you say that on Passover, and you say that on Yom Kippur, etc., right? It is true, every holiday has a powerful spiritual energy, and on those days I will usually talk about the powerful spiritual energy of that day, but Purim has the most of all. And in order to really back this up, I would like to point something out that the Hasidic masters point out to us, which is that Yom Kippur, in the Torah, is called Yom HaKippurim. One of the ways of reading it, obviously it means the Day of Atonement. But another way of reading it is the day that is like Purim. In other words, the spiritual energy of Yom Kippur. Remember when I stood here at the front by Ne'ilah, right before we were about to close the doors, and at the end of Yom Kippur, and I said, this is the most powerful energy, and it's Ne'ilah, and we can ask God for anything, we can do Teshuvah, etc. On Purim, you can accomplish more. In fact, Yom Kippur is only like Purim. Where does this come from? How can Purim be only like Yom Kippur? The answer ties into some of the ideas we mentioned already. This idea that Purim is the day when we stood in Mesiras Nefesh. Where did it come from? How did the Jewish people, who many of them were assimilated, many of them were eating non-kosher, many of them were celebrating together with Achashverosh the destruction of the temple, and yet when push came to shove, they all, for a full year, stood in Mesiras Nefesh ready to give up their lives for God. Where does this come from? This comes from the depths of the soul. And from that day on, from Purim and on, that is something we can tap into on Purim. You can go through, trust me, you can go through the 24, 48 hours of Purim and not tap into it. But if you do tap into it, you should know that spiritually what's happening is as follows. The deepest level of your soul, the soul at which the Hasidic masters teach us, which means a Jew, not he wants to and not he can. Even if he tries to, he cannot be separated from God. There are all sorts of external layers where we can be separated from God. I didn't do this mitzvah, I didn't do this mitzvah properly, I lost my temper with somebody, etc. Yeah, we're disconnected from God at that moment, but only superficially. At the deepest core of a Jew, we are connected to God even when we sin, no matter what. And the Jewish people during the time of Purim, for the first time in history, tapped into that. And ever since then, we have that opportunity. We have the opportunity on Purim to tap into the core, the essence of our soul, which becomes revealed on Purim, and to say, I am going to tap into that and I'm going to make a change. And that can tie into teshuvah, that can tie into miracles that people need, etc. And we saw this by the Chabad Rebbes. Purim was the one day a year they were like out there. Believe it or not, the second one was like Bomer. But we'll talk about that when like Bomer comes. But Purim was the day. It was like there were miracles. There were like the secrets that they revealed in the Hasidism that was revealed on Purim were unbelievable. There were certain Rebbes that even afterwards said they were in a transcendent state that they didn't remember, not because they were drunk, heaven forbid, right? They didn't remember the Hasidism that they said afterwards, the secrets of the Torah that they revealed on Purim. They didn't remember it after Purim, and Hasidim had to tell it to them. In other words, it was literally just spiritual revelations coming down into. So I think it's important to know. As we think about this, okay, some of these ideas we mentioned already. Let me talk about Hakora L'Mafreya. The Talmud. The Talmud in Tractate Megillah tells us Hakore L'Mafreya Lo Yatza. If somebody reads the Megillah backwards, he's not Yotze. He does not fulfill his obligation. Now I don't know what this means on a literal level. I guess you read all the words of the Megillah backwards. I don't know exactly what this means on a literal level. But lemafreya in Hebrew also means as if it happened a long time ago, retroactively. It's the same word in Hebrew. The Talmud is telling us that if a person reads the story of the Megillah thinking that yes, it was a powerfully spiritual day, but only back then, and today it's not. No. The story, that Lo Yatza, they did not get to point any for they did not fulfill their obligation. When we hear the Megillah read, and this year it will not be difficult, because everything is going on in Israel and in Iran, etc. It will not be difficult, but we will tap into the Megillah as if that story is happening now. Both physically, the Jewish people will be zocha, we will see it no doubt, to miracles beyond nature over the next, keep your eye on it, you're going to see it. Over the next 24, 48 hours, we're going to see the most amazing miracles. And also spiritually, and that we have to create, we will be in a miraculous state, in a supernatural state. So it's important to tap into that. The last thing I want to talk about, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood things about the holiday, is this idea of wine. What's the connection with wine and Purim? This drunkenness in Purim, like Simchat Torah, you're also supposed to be happy, right? Even on Pesach, you should be happy. And sure, we drink 4 cups of wine, but on Purim, it seems that there's this extra connection. So on a simple level, it's because wine appears very often in the story of Purim. When Haman and Achashverosh meet for the first time for the destruction of the Jewish people, it's over wine. And when Esther invites Haman and Achashverosh to the thing, and there's the reversal of it, it's over wine. It seems to continually, even spiritually, at the beginning of the downfall, which was what is Achashverosh's party, wine features very much. It's one of the only details we get about the story. That it was a beautiful place, and Achashverosh was showing off his wife, and that they were drinking a lot of wine. That's another detail we get, right? So in other words, on all sides, we see the wine playing a huge role. So what is wine? And it's on a simple level, that's why we drink wine on Purim, right? To commemorate that. Okay, beautiful. But wine, it turns out, if you think about the character of wine, it ties in directly with the whole theme of this. What is wine? Wine comes from grapes. Okay? Now, I'd like to invite any of you, because I've never done the experiment, and I've been sharing this idea for many years, and I've read about it for many years, but I'd like to invite any of you to do the experiment if you'd like to. Eat a whole bunch of grapes. I have a feeling, if you eat a lot of grapes, the only thing you're going to get is a stomach ache. Maybe a headache. You certainly will not get drunk. Certainly you will not start to tap into a deeper level of yourself, and you'll feel uninhibited, etc. No, none of that's going to happen. You just get a headache and a stomach ache, and that's it. Probably mainly a stomach ache. Mm-hmm. But then you take those grapes, and you crush them. You go through a process, and all of a sudden on the other side, we get a new concept, a new thing, a new creation, wine. You drink that wine, it has a very different chemical impact on you. So you think to yourself, okay, must be something else was introduced, right? No, nothing else was introduced. The quality for what wine does to a person, which according to Torah is explained as nichnas yayin yatsa sod, when wine goes in, secrets come out. That quality is found in the grape. Nothing new is introduced. It's not like they say, okay, we're going to get a lot of grape juice and then we're going to spike it. No, it's found in the grape. But the only way it gets revealed from the grape is when the grape is crushed. When the grape is crushed, that's when wine comes out. Very similar to what we discussed in this past week's parsha, right? When we spoke about the menorah. Olives have the same quality. Olives have oil in them. But eat as many olives as you want. You're not gonna, you might get fat, right? But it won't be as fattening as oil. But then you crush the olives, and then what comes out? The purest oil. This is very symbolic of the Jewish people. And it was on display during Purim. I would argue it's been on display since October 7th, to one degree or another. That the Jewish people have a very, very deep energy within them. The soul, the neshama, whatever, right? There are different levels that we can talk about. This connection with God, an atzmistic connection, an essential connection with God. And we're supposed to do our best to tap into it and be in touch with it, etc. But unfortunately, very often, when it comes out is when we're crushed. So it comes out during a story like Purim, a gzeira, a decree for annihilation against the Jewish people. If you take a look at the Holocaust, you see so many amazing stories of martyrdom of Jewish people being mekadesh Shem Shemayim, of sanctifying God's name. The deepest levels of emunah, the deepest levels of belief in God come out when we're crushed. And all of us know this from our own personal lives. That when we are crushed, when we're in a very, very difficult state, that's usually when our deepest kochot, we tap into something in us that we find that like, ooh, I never knew I was capable of this. And we grow through that moment. Many people in Pasadena and Altadena found this out when they lost their homes or they were displaced from their homes for a long time. And I'm not taking the fact that it was a tragedy. We don't wish it on anybody. But also during those moments, talk to them and you'll find out that they found these deep, deep strengths that they had, that they tapped into, which now will be with them forever. A new character, new relationships, new ideas, right? And it didn't come from anywhere else. It only came from in them. So this is a very, very powerful idea. But it also seems like a very somber idea. It's like a very dark idea. Like seriously? Is this what the reason for anti-Semitism? And are we just doomed to have anti-Semitism? We have to be crushed, otherwise the deepest part of our neshama doesn't come out? So the Rebbe says no. In the last mimer that the Rebbe distributed, in the last Hasidic discourse that the Rebbe distributed to Hasidim before he suffered a stroke, which eventually led to his passing in 1984, the Rebbe talks about that right before the coming of Mashiach, we have to have the strongest and deepest and most intense level of crushing. And that level of crushing has to be self-inflicted. This doesn't mean we have to go outside and put ourselves in pain. No. It means we have to... What happens when we get crushed? What's the dynamic of it? We get crushed. Haman decrees that the Jewish people can be annihilated. We freak out. We're like, oh my gosh, these people hate us, etc. Let me tap into who I really am. And then we tap into who we really are as Jews. But what if we can do that by crushing ourselves? In other words, instead of somebody else showing us how terrible exile is, what if we can do it to ourselves? Sitting here in America, Baruch Hashem, we're living in wonderful times, right? And by that I don't mean that there's not issues. There are issues. October 7th and everything's going on in Israel now, and all these things we spoke about are horrible things. But our lives today, in theory, if we want, and we turn off the news, and sometimes we wish to do that. We're like, I can't handle it, right? If we live, we can just have wonderful lives. We live here in America. We live, we have what to pay the bills with, and we have friends all around us, etc. Even non-Jewish friends. We can choose not to be crushed by exile. Says the Rebbe, the job of the last nation before Mashiach comes is to crush ourselves. To internally, on our own, we have to create what's called the kassis, the crushing of the olive, the crushing of the grape. We have to ourselves decide, I am crushed by the exile, even though my life is physically good, because I know I'm not connected to Hashem the way I should be, because Mashiach is not here, I am crushed. And in that way, we ourselves can bring out that deepest level of energy. And I want to conclude this class on this note, that this Purim, we should be able to, even though we have some outward crushing as well, from Iran and from whatever, and from mental health, because it's hard to watch the news, etc., like this, right? But from that outward crushing, we should create the real internal crushing. We should crush ourselves. We should bring ourselves to a state where we are tapped into the deepest level of our neshama, so that we can connect to Hashem and bring about the coming of Mashiach. May it be speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you all for joining us for Demystify Purim. Next week we will be back to regularly scheduled programming, albeit briefly, by the way. For a few weeks we'll do Mensch at Work. and then we're going to do some laws of Pesach before Pesach. So in other words, the plan basically is like this. For the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to finish off Mensch at Work. A few more laws about the business place. We're going to finish it because that's going to be the end of that topic. Then we're going to do a week or two about Pesach, about the laws of Pesach. And after Pesach, as you guys know, we're starting a new class which is called the Taste of Thanks, which is all about the laws of blessings.
A taste of what?
A taste of thanks. That's what it's called. A taste of thanks. As in making brachot before you eat, making brachot before.
Okay.
All right. That's going to be the new Sunday morning class. Thank you all for joining us.